So where's the substance abuse houses at this time?
Odyssey House, I don't know, let me double check something here. I don't know exactly where they are. It should be on here somewhere.
Is that near the Lincoln houses?
I don't know. Let me look. Let me just look. Let's see. ARTC was over there on Park Avenue, as I remember, 18 something, 1880, something like that. But they were the major substance abuse, one of the major substance abuse programs that were probably in the vanguard of the programs, not only for this community, but maybe even for the country. At that time, the unfortunate drug of choice was heroin, pre-crack. In fact, when crack came out, people wished we could go back to heroin. Of course, crack, as you heard, was whack. And it was really incredible. But
it was destroying the brain faster than.
Oh, more! It was much more difficult even for people. It seemed to get off of it, you know. And so, and you know, heroin was more of a sedative type. You know, people who got high on heroin tended to nod and just chill out.
Okay.
Crack was whack. People were, you know, aggressive.
Doing really.
Yeah, they were. It was more of an up kind of high.
Make me feel like you're Superman.
Yeah, and you've heard about what some of the folks who were called crackheads used to do in terms of those super outrageous physical activities. But heroin had its extraordinary acts as well, because when people were on heroin, they didn't do crazy things like that, because heroin is a nodding kind. They would be like this, right? But the drive to get it, the addiction and the pain coming from not having it, had them doing extraordinary things to get money. You know what I mean? Like for instance, you noticed that there was a period in which everybody had to get gates on their windows, especially if they were fire escapes. That was free crack. That I know that from the heroin era, because the junkies would, you know, do all kind of acrobatics to get into your apartment, even if you know. So the crack was a much more aggressive kind of drug. But he was in that whole period. He was one of the forerunners that recognized that it wasn't simply a matter of criminalizing or holding in disdain addicts, that they were human beings, that we as a community, as a society, had a responsibility for the fact that drugs were in the community to begin with, and secondly, a responsibility to create opportunities for them to overcome their addictions. So that was sort of the era of the development of substance abuse treatment programs.
Yeah, I think that
this sort of is his. He passed.
Right.
And this is a little bit of this here is his obituary, which gives you some sense of the kind of work that he did, and is also his training and whatnot. So let me let you hold on to this. Sometimes we do that as journalists and filmmakers.
Right.
So all of us have sort of a doctoring role to play with the privilege we have to serve or to be a part of a.
Yeah, as I was telling you that, you know, when I was collecting signatures for Cordell.
Mhm.
One of the ladies that I was walking with, she knew the area better than I did, and she pointed out that building to me, not very far from the Lincoln
Public housing.
Public Housing, yeah. And she, very fondly, she spoke about the work that this gentleman did.
Oh,
And
good.
yeah, that's why
Well-
I remember the place.
Yeah, that's-
A very nice building, beautiful.
No, he was a forerunner in
Yeah,
that regard.
quite before his time.
Yes.
So to speak, and the place still stands, quite
Uh,
representative of his work.
okay.
So now you're running in the marathon on Sunday.
Yes.
Actually, tomorrow.
Let me put it this way.
Mhm.
I've enrolled into the marathon, and I've been accepted, and my number is 1979.
1979.
That was so I'm in the marathon, and I picked up my what they call it, the shirt, my number,
Mhm.
and so I'm in.
Yeah. So you're running with these group of
Actually, the group is from a program that Dr. Prim actually founded,
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
and so we will be. I'll be wearing the shirt. I think this is it. Ding!
Okay. Run for your life.
Odyssey House.
Odyssey House.
Let's get a close up.
Yeah.
Where rediscovering lives.
Right. So this is his work, and they run every year. They have a team every year,
Okay.
and for the last few years they've allowed me to run with them as part of their team, and
Let's open the back of it. Let's see what's in the back.
well, on the back we have
Run for
a
your
message:
life.
running for your life, turning addicts
Into
to athletes, turning addicts into athletes. We're at Odyssey House, where recovery lives and thrives. So they've been around, and they've been in the forefront of saving lives, returning lives to, people that want to be productive and. But you know what?
And how many years have you run with him?
Oh, I don't know. I have to double check.
Okay, so you've been running with him for a
For a
while
while,
then.
for a few
Okay.
years. I think the last 3 or 4 years. Last year. Yeah, maybe the last 3 or 4 years.
Mhm. And you've been running for how long?
Too long, probably.
Oh, really? So you've always been, okay.
I've been running. I don't know how many times I've run a marathon.
That's good.
Yeah. I have. I don't. I think I'm in double figures.
Oh, okay. That speaks,
That's.
Yeah.
But I have to. Yeah.
that's good.
Mhm.
That's very good, yeah. So why do you run? I mean, they're running for a
Well-
purpose.
We all run for a purpose. My purpose is multifaceted, I guess. I'm wearing this T-shirt. That's one of my purposes. Their T-shirt, Odyssey House's T-shirt, helping to turn addicts into athletes. Or, in other words, productive citizens, healthy, and my motto is your health is your wealth.
Aye.
So clearly, that's one of my personal motivations, as well as I'm pretty sure the motivation behind the work that the people do at Odyssey House, and obviously Dr. Prim, as a medical professional, has also been about making sure that people live healthy lives, and recognizing the challenges that sometimes distract us or undermine our intention to live healthy lives. So this is one of his legacies, this program called Odyssey House.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So do you think that the present administration is continuing his work the way that he would have liked it to be continued?
Which one? Well, I think that there's room for improvement, needless to say. But I think that there is an appreciation of this challenge, and there is efforts being made to meet the challenge. And I think that if I get the opportunity, I would love to join the president of this administration, whichever one happens to be there when I'm there, along with folks from the legacy of Dr. Prim, including people at Reality House and the other such programs, to help them understand the importance of the work that he's done, which has been to some extent supported. So it's not as if there's been a blind eye turned to his work and to his into the need, but it's not a need that has yet been overcome.
Okay.
So we shall overcome.
Okay.
We're still sane, and I think that towards that end, we can do some things on the federal level, following, frankly, some of what has already been done, because this country has tended to provide a focus on this problem.
Now you said that the president that's coming in the next election, or the present one, President
Present
Obama.
and future, and
Okay.
all,
Now, that
as
brings me
well
to
as
a question.
past.
You're talking about presidents, working with the presidents. You're running for Congress.
Yes, yes.
Let's talk about that.
Okay.
Is that something that you have been contemplating for a while now, or is it something that you see a need in a particular area in your community? Because I know your community is something that is near and dear to your heart. That you feel that being in that position as a congressman, you're able to.
Well, it's a great honor to have any position, and I've learned that in the most humble of ways, that is to say, as long as I've had the privilege of representing this neighborhood, starting actually in 1979, which coincidentally happens to be my number for
Okay.
the marathon.
For the marathon,
so to
okay.
speak. I think easy solutions create problems. You understand?
Okay.
So I think that we have to, obviously deal with it in terms of the proliferation of these weapons. That's very, very important, because
Yes, yeah.
these products are sold in an armed weapon way. When one comes with the other,
Okay.
and usually the weapon brings the other. You understand? You can't do one. You don't do it without that. So that's number one. Number two, there's also, unfortunately, we have to create a situation in which it doesn't. Certain communities have a proliferation and other communities don't. People come into certain communities to get, but in other communities, you can't go in there to get it.
Right.
They don't. It's not allowed. So policing is a big part of the challenge. We have to create a way that our policing can more effectively prevent, not just see. What we're in the process of doing is getting rid of that which has already infiltrated, invaded, overwhelmed the community. So, if you've ever had any kind of infestation in your home, rats, rodents, or anything of the like,
It takes a while to get rid of them.
The infestation reminds us that prevention,
True.
right,
Yeah.
is the best medicine.
So That's one of the
And
problems
so
that.
what happens is we use that medicine some places, but it's not used in other
In other
places.
places.
So prevention here and non-prevention, maybe invitation over here. You want to, don't do it here, but
Yeah.
don't do it here either. Blink, wink, wink.
Yeah, not good, not good.
You understand? So
Yeah.
it's allowed.
Wow.
And it puts on us a great struggle to challenge it and to get rid of it,
Right,
to prevent
right.
it.
So do you see, are y'all doing anything in the Senate or the Assembly? Is anything happening on that level to go after the manufacturer? Because there's someone manufacturing that stuff.
I think that there are obviously ongoing efforts towards that end.
I
The
see.
question becomes, how effective. Clearly, we're not effective enough.
Let's talk about something else, that other thing that's dear to your heart. We talked about the prison reform. You had a radio show on that.
Behind the walls
Behind
is
the
what it used to be
walls,
called.
yeah. Is that
And
still going
BAI.
on?
Well,
Right.
there's changes dramatically that have taken place at BAI in terms of their
Okay.
programming
Right, right.
and their budgeting, and so our program has been put on hold temporarily.
Okay.
We are looking for a new home, a new venue to
Okay.
use it, but it was very valuable in terms of addressing concerns like what we are discussing now. And that's just in terms of prisons per se and what's happening in that regard. But just the whole general social service needs and other kinds of challenges, socioeconomic challenges that communities are going through that result in being behind the walls.
Right, right.
So, and sometimes when we did our show, it almost seemed as if we were not simply talking about the behind the walls, like on Rikers Island or Attica or some other kind of facility, but really behind the walls where we live.
Right, okay, yeah.
You understand, in terms of the community feeling sometimes as if they were imprisoned by all of these challenges that are crippling.
Yeah, but I think that your program has opened the door to what is happening today. Look at what happened at Rikers Island. There been some improvement there, or they have a program in place to bring about some improvement in that area.
Eddie Ellis was the founder of this program, so to speak, in that he had a show that focused on criminal justice issues and offered us some time to do our version for on every fourth Saturday of the month.
Okay.
And I want to give tribute to him. He's no longer with us, but for many, he was an ex-convict. He spent a lot of time in prison, and he came back to the community and dedicated himself to addressing those sort of issues. And he did that eloquently on his own show and allowed us to be a part of that show or have our own version of that show. And so let's assume that they've declined. That therefore will be the numbers needed to win, whatever's left. Towards that end, I would imagine that there will be some slight percentage of voters, numbers that will increase, but I don't think a significant increase in those numbers will take place. On one hand. On the other hand, at least for the primary, on the other hand, there may be some voter registration activity that'll take place, significant voter registration, more significant activity taking place after the primary, because generally towards the general election you see a lot more voter registration activity.
Okay.
But analysis that we use is not based on projected increases in registration, but on what's the reality now.
Okay, I see, get you.
I can't say, oh, I'm gonna have to register 10 more people if I'm gonna win, or 1,000 more people if I'm gonna win. I mean, I should do registration, but the analysis has to be based to some extent on what exists now, and what is it that you think you've done up till now that makes people encourage you to run.
That brings the next question. What have you done? I mean, I know you've done a lot of in the community that is directly to the individual. But what else do you plan to do?
Well, we passed some. I'm not quite sure what that means directly to an individual. Let me have. Most of us.
Like a broad.
Let me finish.
Most
there are individualized things that we do, like what we might call constituent services.
Okay.
Where individuals come in, or groups of individual families, whatever, come in, and we serve them in terms of their specific needs. So that's individuals that we serve, or families that we serve. Constituent services is what we generally call it. And we've been very rich in terms of having a very good staff and a very good outreach towards that end, a very open office that people feel comfortable coming to and asking about their various problems. And then as legislators, that generally operate in a legislative body, let's say in this case Albany as a state senator, or let's say in the past New York City as at the city council as a city council member, or let's say in the future in Washington as a congressperson. There we tend to also focus on legislation, and that legislation sometimes is in terms of bills that provide opportunities, and or in terms of budgets that fund programs or fund services, or maybe even some cases cut the funding for services or cut the programs that may exist depending upon a variety of different reasons. Sometimes it's, but so that's the way we generally operate. So when it comes to individuals, we could never really quantify how many individuals we address. I mean, we have a pretty rigorous, effective constituent services operation, and we have a lot of people coming up for help. But that doesn't measure all that we help. When you take a bill, let's say that deals with solitary confinement, yes, the immediate family that comes to us and talks about their loved one that may be in solitary confinement suffering and joins us in our hearing or in our advocacy to end solitary confinement, then we know that will touch more than an individual. Right. It will end a policy, a practice that will never, ever again result in people being subjected to torturous conditions, even if they're guilty of a crime. It would take the inhumanity out of incarceration and the justice system. So we believe that effectively we probably are more influential when we have policy in terms of laws that they get passed and address issues like whether it be solitary confinement or affordable housing or any number of areas that we know in this community and other communities, such policies need to be legislated, signed into law, and implemented because it tends to affect more people.
Right.
Now, our constituent services operation tends to be more individualized as opposed to policy that has a statewide, very often, impact, as opposed to a neighborhood impact. The constituent services stuff tends to be more neighborhood oriented. Policy stuff may come out of a need that a neighborhood has, but has broader legislative intent. So if you get a solitary confinement bill passed, it won't just affect my constituents. Everybody in the state of New York will have that law to guide how their prison system is operating. And so, that's sort of the way it tends to operate, and obviously doing that on a congressional level allows you to be even more impactful, because very often federal legislation has an impact on what you can even do on a state and local level.
Right. Has there been any movement in the Senate or the Assembly about solitary confinement? Has there been any action?
Now you're talking about another important challenge, which is the legislative process. There has been some movement in the Assembly side of the state legislature, but we've had not much movement in the Senate side. And in that regard, you have to understand a little bit about what we might call legislative politics, or how legislative bodies do their business. And generally, they do their business in terms of majorities. Okay. So if you have a majority that favors a certain way, then that way is represented in legislation that gets passed, and very often has a great potential of becoming the law, or has some potential of becoming the law, because at least you have one foot,
right? Some action
step. But if on the other hand, the other legislative body, which is the Senate in this case, does not pass that, then the legislation is not going to move forward to the desk of the governor, who has to ultimately sign off on it and then implement it in terms of the law. Now, so in New York State, you have an assembly that's, let's say, numerically superior in terms of Democrats. So they are in the leadership of proposing and effectively passing legislation out of their body. Similar legislation that may be in the Senate will have to have the support to move it forward, such that if it comes out of the Senate, then you have a bill that both houses have passed that goes on to the desk of the governor, who then ultimately has the opportunity to sign it or veto it. Unfortunately, very often, especially with certain type of what we might call progressive legislation, like let's say the solitary confinement legislation, you won't get that passed out of the Senate, because it is, for the most part, run by Republicans who have a different perspective on criminal justice issues versus the more progressive perspective that we have, that this bill represents. And therefore, while it may be passed in one house, it's not going to be passed in the other house, and therefore it goes nowhere near the governor, who we can't be sure, even under those circumstances, whether or not he actually supports it either. Because in some cases, the governor still can say, well, even if you do pass it, I'm not signing it.
Right.
But you don't have a snowball's chance in hell if you can't get it out of both houses. And so much of the kind of legislation, like we call progressive/liberal legislation, that you're talking about, would be stifled from the get-go, because it can't get out of the Senate, because the Senate is dominated by Republicans, and they're not passing, or they have not historically passed that type of legislation.
That brings me to my last question,
Now,
and I want to
similarly,
thank you.
that dynamic takes place when we talk about budgets, because you have the
Okay.
legislation, which is the policy, and budgets, which pay for the programs that maybe the policy creates. And they dominate the budget process in the assembly, but the Republicans dominate it in the Senate. So again, as per the negotiations, very often what might be considered a progressive Democratic agenda might not be supported. And so the kind of legislation from a perspective of the budget legislation that goes to the governor, then ultimately has to be signed by the governor. He can send it back, any piece of legislation back, and say, this is what I'd like. That does not mean he can get it.
Right.
Because each of us as legislative bodies is independent.
Yeah.
So while ultimately the governor is the governor, he doesn't have the dictatorial authority to decide what gets passed by the legislators. So that's the nature of our democracy, which I'm not criticizing. I think, in fact, it's a wonderful thing. It's just that for those of us like myself who are Democrats in the Senate, we're somewhat frustrated
Right,
because
right.
of the fact that we don't have a majority.
Right. So let me ask you, although it's moving, it has some movement within that group, and it might not reach the governor's desk. The fact that it's moving among.
It's not. It may move. Well, I'm not.
Some action within either the Assembly or the Senate, or let's say the Senate, the Assembly, which is the majority of Democrats, that might.
It has some life in one house,
Right. Okay.
but you need life in two houses for it to move
Right.
towards the government.
But then the fact that it's there,
Is it?
and it hasn't moved, in the successful line, the fact that it's some movement there, we can wait for the next election, and and if the Senate gets the majority of Democrats,
Then-
there is that possibility that.
It's a new ball game then.
Okay, but you don't.
But otherwise, we're
but-
playing the same ball game called stalemate.
Right, but you don't have to start from A. You're probably at a point D, moving
No,
forward.
I guess you could look at it that way. The
Okay.
bottom line is this, though, is what you're saying is it can come out of one house, but it can't come out of the other house,
Right.
and so you're at zero. Okay?
You're zero
You can't go. You're not.
this term.
Well, this term, until you get into a place where either those who are in the majority, let's say Republican, are converted policy-wise to support that, or they are replaced with a Democratic majority.
Right, okay, yeah.
It's just very place tend to get less of their vision, of their policies in play until such time that they get more control over that body.
Right,
Now,
right.
I don't want to leave it simply always up to us,
Mhm.
because sometimes, we have coalitions with our colleagues from other groups,
Right,
white groups, so to speak. Like, for instance, technically, if you just look at all the Democrats in the Senate, right, we do have more Democrats in the Senate than there are Republicans. So technically, or not technically, but numerically, there are more Democrats. But technically, those Democrats decided not to ally themselves with their colleagues. They decided to ally themselves with the Republicans and give their votes and sit with the Republicans. So, for the sake of conversation, let's say the Democrats sit on this side of the table and the Republicans sit on that side of the table. Now, after an election, we get more seats. Move this seat over here. It's now a Democratic seat. So now while you had 4 on that side and 4 on this side, now we have 5 and 3.
3 Republicans.
So now we're in the majority.
Right.
But if this guy, this guy go over here,
It's something we have experienced.
well, that's what I'm trying to tell you. They've been empowered, and they now have control and have weakened or actually crippled the ability
Make it
for
hard to
the DREAM Act,
Right.
for instance, and other such legislation from being in effect.
Right.
So all the opportunities that DREAM Act embodies, all the hopes, all the dreams, all the resources, all of that is crippled.
Mm-hmm.
It's put on ice
Until the next election.
until we can regain the majority. So until we learn to vote more and to vote for those whose agenda includes the policies that have benefit for our community.
So that's why it's
And
important.
it's very, very important because this, for me, this was like, this last session was an opportunity for the Democrats in the Senate to gain the majority for the first time in many, many years, decades.
Yeah.
And no sooner did the numbers favor, at the end of the election, favor us, and we were pulling out the DREAM Act and all the other potential important pieces of legislation that have been on ice for our constituents for so long,
Right.
that other members, what we call the Kleinites, decide to change from associating with us
With the Democrats.
to associating with the Republicans.
Yeah.
So where we crippled them, they empowered them.
Yeah. Right.
Where we took the power, they gave it back. Where we were able to put on the table the kind of concerns that the Latino community might have been waiting for in terms of something like the DREAM Act, they'd said, hold on, or other, but that's just one. Think of all that so-called progressive stuff that has been put back on ice after that moment of potential defrosting and enabling the elected officials to vote on legislation that would, quote, bring the bacon home, as we say. Bring home the DREAM Act, bring home a living wage, bring home the kind of policies that would sort of enable our communities to step up a little further away from poverty and from certain type of inferior conditions.
Right, yeah. Well, I hope that...
And so it's very important that the community understand the political dynamics. So just because you elect someone doesn't mean that all our dreams are going to come true. There's a dynamic, a political dynamic, a legislative dynamic that takes place, and we have to, be paying attention to it. Like we pay attention to soap operas. We have to pay attention to it. Like we pay attention to the numbers. We have to pay attention to it. You understand? Like we pay attention to the stories all day. We have to pay attention to it because it's about our bread and butter. ¿Cómo se dice bread and butter en español?
How do you say that?
Pan y manteca o mantequilla.
Mantequilla.
Okay.
Pan y mantequilla.
Sí.
Es la pan y mantequilla.
El pan.
El pan y la mantequilla.
Sí.
So you'll be brushing up in your Spanish.
¿Por qué no?
Guillermo
Me
Perkins.
llamo Guillermo Perkins, el senador en este distrito número 30. Bienvenidos,
Sí,
vecinos. Te quiero mucho.
That's great. No, Senator Perkins, I want to be a part of your congressional move to,
No, you are as of now.
as of now.
And so, thank you for
Thank
your
you.
support and look forward to working with you.
Definitely, definitely.
To bring the bacon home, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah. This is quite unplanned, but I'm glad we had the chance to chat in a relaxed atmosphere.
Sure.
And,
Well,
If I go before I'm old, oh brother of mine, please don't forget me if I go. Bartender